So good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight for this joint workshop between the Select Board and Topsham Development Inc. This is a great turnout, and the neat thing is a lot of people from different perspectives of the town that will benefit from hearing this. But probably first, just so everyone knows each other, we'll go around the room. Mark Walter, Town Manager, and Marlette.
Ryan Holmes, Select Board Member.
Marie Brewer, Select Board.
Dan Callahan, Select Board.
Kurt Neufeld, TDI.
Andrew Sturgeon, Chair of TDI.
Mark Fonzie, Sewer District Trustee. Chris LeBaron, Superintendent of Sewer District. Pete Arnold, CPIC.
Rich Schultz, CPIC.
Guys Lottie, Director of Planning.
Josh Franklin, Town Planner. Jeff Emerson, the Assistant Town Manager.
Chris Lyle from White Pierce. Brody Campbell from White Pierce.
Chris Dow, also from White Pierce.
Thank you. And Andy, maybe you can set the stage for it.
Good evening, Topsham Select Board, Town Manager, Sewer District, CPIC members, staff. And of course, our consultants, Wright Pierce. What we're gonna do tonight is make a presentation to the Select Board on a study that Topsham Development Inc. commissioned Wright Pierce to complete. This is a study that was done, I think, 20 years ago. About
More.
And we had some numbers, and the study is centered on what do we need to do and what would it cost to expand our infrastructure to the west side of 295. But more importantly, what do we need to increase with our infrastructure, even if we don't go across 295? We've got some issues, and I think those issues you'll see tonight were a little more than I think we thought. So we're happy with the result of the study. TDI is, and the fact that it opens our eyes to what we need to do as the economic arm of the town of Topsham, that is TDI, and we need to work in the near future with the Select Board and the town staff to see how we're gonna handle improvements, what improvements we need to focus on, and when we need to go. But tonight is really just a chance for you to hear what we heard from the consultants on what needs to be done to go to certain levels of increase in infrastructure studies. So, Chris, if you're ready, I'm going to turn it over to Wright Pierce, and you can ask questions as you goes. Thanks.
Thanks, Andy. Again, Chris Lyle from White Pierce. We were brought on board several months ago, as Andy mentioned, by Topsham Development Inc. To look at sewer and water needs in some select areas of the top. So I now have a figure showing those areas. As was mentioned earlier, Brody Campbell and Chris Dow as well this evening. This study, 2004, we did a similar study that looked at sewer and water needs just west of I-95 only. As Andy mentioned, this looks at some other areas on the east side as well. And there's been a couple of other studies that have been done over the past few years, as recently as 2019 by the Water District, looking at some needs, particularly on the east side. So this isn't the first time that this has been discussed. Slides to advance here. This is just an overview of what we're going to talk about. We're going to break this up into wastewater discussions, so sewering needs, and then water discussions as well. And we'll present on each of those. On the wastewater side, we'll look at how we evaluated future potential flows from development, what the requirements would be to be able to collect that wastewater and get it to the Pinewood Drive pump station in Topsham and over under the river to the Brunswick Sewer District, where all the wastewater from Topsham is currently treated. And what the cost would be, and some needs on the east and west side. Water, very similar. We'll be looking at a similar sort of analysis, and we'll be again looking at costs. On the costs, I want to make a caution early on. This is a study. They're study level costs. We've made a lot of assumptions as to where things would be, where pump stations would be, where water infrastructure would be. I wouldn't advise the town to go out and bond this much money, or a developer to go out and bond this much money. More information is needed to refine costs. These are good for comparing alternatives that we have before us. Okay, so the study area, highlighted here in yellow. The study that we did in 2004 was just on the left side of the screen, which is west of I-295. And the study area almost is identical with a couple of exceptions. We added a couple of small areas, met with TDI, and we added a couple of small areas, but it's essentially the same area it was looked at back in 2004 by Wright Pierce. The area on the right side that you can see, that's bordered by 295, as well as 196, and up into the schools and the annex property and a little north of there, Old Augusta Road. That area was added, and that was not looked at back in 2004 when we did this study. So we've expanded the area a little bit on the study that we looked at, area we looked at. And this figure just shows, and I know it's hard to read, the yellow outline is the same boundary you just saw, but it shows the zones and the current zoning that's included within the study area. And if you look at west of I-295, you got the MUC, mixed use commercial 1 zone, a business park zone, some corridor zones along 196, and a fair amount of residential area that's both south and north of 196. And on the east side, you have commercial corridor, some limited industrial, residential, and some areas around the schools that are included within that zone. So looking at a bunch of different types of zones, and Brody will talk a little bit about how we looked at those from a flow assessment perspective. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Brody to speak about the wastewater side of our evaluation.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, so I'm going to speak specifically for the wastewater side of things, and then I'll hand it over to Chris to speak on the water. So specifically on wastewater flow projection side of things, we broke it down into really 2 different subsets. You have commercial and residential zoned areas. So for the commercial side of things, you have a really good example in your Topsham Fair Mall currently. So there's lots of different types of businesses there. So we got water usage data from the Brunswick Topsham Water District to be able to understand what the current usage is of that property. So that came out to about 500 gallons per day per acre, which is in line with other studies we've done of communities in the past. But I will caveat that with, it really depends on the type of development that's put in there. So you have a car wash, which is, upwards of 5,000 or 6,000 gallons per day per acre versus storage units, which basically generate nothing. So in discussions with TDI and Andy and Kirk specifically, looking at the MUC parcel just west of I-295 and the Kirker parcel, we assumed aggressive development there. So 1,000 gallons per day per acre was used for those 2 parcels specifically. And then the smaller commercial zones, we stuck with the 500 gallons per day per acre. Then on the residential side, it really breaks down to 3 different categories there. You have existing homes, you have proposed developments that we're aware of that have come before the different planning boards and whatnot down. And then you have the remaining undeveloped land. So the undeveloped land is basically broken down and subdivided into the smallest possible development based on the coding requirements. So you add all that up, you get a total number of homes, both existing and proposed, and multiply that by 175 gallons per day per lot to determine the residential usage. So just breaking that down, trying to use the laser pointer here to help emphasize this a little bit. But this gets broken down into several different sewer shed areas, several different drainage areas, essentially high points that are draining down to low points where we put our pump stations. So west of I-295 is this blue, starker blue color. That includes the commercial corridor along Route 196 as well as that MUC parcel. That would generate an estimated 400 gallons per minute of demand there. Then there's also this large yellow area that's partially cut off on this figure, largely residential, developed, and then wetlands north by Route 196. So based on discussions with TDI, we didn't assume that would be sewered in the future, just based on existing residential lots of septic systems that are operating properly, and then the wetlands area there as well. And I'll get into some of the downstream implications of that decision as well, in terms of the amount of flow that we generated if we include that parcel. And then east of I-295, this pink area, which includes the Kirker lot as well as the limited industrial zone, northeast of Route 201, that would generate an estimated 230 gallons per minute of wastewater flow. This yellow area here along Main Street, Route 201, is all existing sewer area. So there's limited growth expected there, and that's already tied into the sewer that actually runs right by us out here on Main Street. The red portion here is the schools as well as the annex property, potential Liberty Circle development. That all goes to the existing annex pump station, which is actually only getting about 70 gallons a minute of flow currently. And it actually has a capacity of all the way up to 470 gallons per minute based on the size of the existing pumps and equipment there. So there's some capacity there, which will be important in the next couple of slides. And then the rest of the limited industrial zone, including the mobile home park and the wooded area that would generate an estimated 75 gallons per minute there.
On the yellow area where Main Street is, where there's residential right now, was there consideration to the recode that is coming up, but the increased density population allowed in that area potentially for increased flow?
So we did look at one of the proposed developments here behind ZBF Tire. Beyond that, there's a couple of, there's a Monroe pump station here that collects this entire development that ties into Main Street. Chris, do you have anything to add to that? Because there's some area over here behind like Lee
I'm just trying to zoom in. I'm thinking more Main Street area where the densities are allowed to increase through the, town goes that through, then we might have more apartment buildings or larger structures that would be there.
I think we'll cover it early when we go to the slide on the Main Street capacity.
Okay.
Because there is capacity within the sewer that exists out here and all that comes down here right now. So I think that might cover it when it gets to the next slide.
Thank you.
Yeah, so now that we've defined the different sewer sheds and the projected flow generated nature of those, what are the infrastructure requirements necessary to handle that flow? So this is a little bit of a busy slide, but I'll talk through each area specifically. So in order to allow the growth west of 295, you essentially have to redirect the annex pump station force main. So that annex pump station force main comes down and connects into a gravity sewer right out front of Lee Toyota, the manhole there. So that flows right down in front of us here on Main Street. So getting that flow out of Main Street over to Mountain Road, redirecting that force main to a new force main, then allows you to accept that 400 gallons a minute west of I-295. So a force main would be directionally drilled underneath the interstate. And we had discussions with DOT, that's their preferred approach as opposed to installing the pipe on the bottom side of the overpass. And then running the force main through a portion of the Crooker parcel over to Main Street and then down in front of the Toyota. So that's one pump station, that's west of I-295. For the Crooker parcel, there'd be a separate pump station there, sized for 230 gallons per minute. And that's just off of Route 201, just south of that on the corner of the Crooker parcel. And that would flow, that's the yellow line, you can kind of see here, I'll trace it with the laser pointer. That would actually go up and connect to the existing annex pump station because that has that capacity there. And then if we redirect the annex pump station force main over to Mountain Road, all that flow goes to the eastern portion of town before it ends up at Pinewood Drive pump station. And then as Chris mentioned, the existing Main Street sewer has a capacity of 725 gallons per minute. And that's based on the limiting section of sewer. So not every section of sewer between each manhole is limited to that. Basically, the smallest section with the least amount of slope has that limiting capacity. So without upsizing that sewer, you can put 725 gallons per minute down through that line ground.
And we already have, we're taking 470 gallons a minute with this proposed plan here out of that through the annex pump station, pumping up the Mountain Road, and we're introducing 400 gallons a minute from west of I-95. So we're actually gaining a little bit of additional capacity there. But we didn't look in detail at each individual one, right, to see which one would actually, how much flow that would generate. We did look, as Brody mentioned, on the proposed development on Union Park to see what that impact would be. We did account for that in our estimates.
Okay.
Yeah.
Along that same line, if say the Crooker was redeveloped that had maybe retail on the first floor or restaurants and then a couple levels of apartments or on top, is that calculated into your numbers, or is it you're just thinking it would mostly be retail offices? Or?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry if you're gonna cover the slide, but as we discussed with Wright Pierce, how we saw development patterns and the assumptions, we didn't, rather than make any assumptions about redevelopment potential, what is built into this, kind of baked into the assumptions is some conservatism on the, the flows. So with the areas that could be developed, that are undeveloped, there's kind of a, I want to say like a 20% excess capacity of those undeveloped areas assumed. So that the numbers would generate, have a buffer. So rather than say, well, yes, this area has high potential for redevelopment, but who knows? We're just gonna say that there's gonna be more demand from the undeveloped areas. And that gives it that little bit of, wiggle room, if you will.
Yeah, that ties back into the 1,000 gallons per day per acre that we assumed for those
Right.
parcels as well, which is pretty robust development there.
Are those areas, assuming once you go under 295, that's a pretty large scope project to begin with, but when you get into Crooked Pit or any other things, are there small sections of this that can be expanded in case of, because these are very large areas of Topsham to develop with a lot of potential and a lot of growth. So without knowing the future, we have to plan for the unknown and kind of like plan for worst case scenarios almost without spending money in worst case scenarios. But I feel like if we can get certain things done, as long as there's expandability in those projects, is that something that would be covered if, let's say, we just have to throw Crooker Park out there, if that ever was redeveloped, we've already got the lines in, and someone needs to go in there, can we upgrade those systems? Will it handle the flow to continue down through Main Street, basically?
I mean, in terms of the pump station sizing specifically that we looked at, I mean, the annex is a great example, they're only getting a peak flow current of 70 gallons per minute. You know, the station was sized for 470, so there's that future development there potentially. It'd be the same as, you know, if you put the 230 gallon per minute station in a Crooker, they're only getting 50 or 60 gallons per minute peak flow with development out there. It's sized for that full build out. In terms of the cost of the wastewater infrastructure specifically, you know, the pumps and all that stuff, there's not a huge cost difference between, you know, 50 horsepower pump or 20 horsepower pump in terms of the grand scheme of the numbers. So the next
So
slide.
it's just more about upgrading pump stations at that point, not the infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, these are numbers based on our flow estimates from what could happen, like a build out analysis. We'll continue on with the Crooker parcel as an example. You'd want to have a pretty good understanding of what that parcel was going to get developed out. And that's part of, you know, what you do, you know, a developer comes in and wants to develop it. They'll come up with flow estimates for their proposed, and maybe they propose a pump station too, right? And they say maybe they determine it only needs to be 150 gallon a minute pump station. But you want to make sure you get the pipe sizes right. So pump stations can be changed out, but you want to make sure the pipes are going to be big enough, because that's going to be a lot of disruption and taking up all of that area to put pipes in the ground, especially going under I-295. So we would probably want to make that pipe a little bit bigger than maybe the 400 gallon per minute flow would need. Because if there was ever a decision to expand further, maybe you just go up one pipe size. So if that pump station ever needed to be upgraded, the pipe would be big enough and you wouldn't have to go back. So there's a lot of those little considerations that would need to happen as you have a better idea of what development would look like.
And that was part of the question, was the buried pipe, you know, the diameter of that can handle a certain flow. I mean, is it a consideration to limit the size so that we limit the growth in those areas as well? Or should we be making this as big as possible, the pipes underground, to accommodate whatever growth can happen?
I mean, that's
kind of what
that's the decision that they'll have.
And if I could add, I guess, today, say someone proposes a development from the west side. I have until we did this project, I had no idea what to tell them in any range. This gives us a range of answers that we could at least address it in this.
So the good news is the locations are gonna stay the same. I mean, things that might change are diameter, size, pump stations, but every location would probably be.
I think where we show the pipelines, you know, is generally where they would go. Obviously, we're showing that pipeline going across the middle of the Crooker's parcel. It may not go exactly where we're showing it. But I think the pump stations, for where we've shown them, you know, there's no agreements in place to put those pump stations there now. This is just a concept.
Yep.
So those are some of the next steps that would be important, is to identify where are parcels of land available to put stations and get the easements necessary to build those stations up at some future time.
I just have, excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold. I just have a question about, you said you gathered statistics for the Union Park possible development over there. What is the flow there? Just out of curiosity.
That's a great question. I don't know off the top of my head.
That's
You know,
cool.
I'll look it up, it's in our report, I'll look it
Get to me
up.
later.
should be in, we'll look at too, for all the tables. It's based on the number of proposed units taxed at 175
Okay.
multiplier. Thanks, it's a little small.
Yeah, that's.
Can't zoom in a little bit.
It's a little bit smaller.
And when you look at a project this big an area, a lot of assumptions we made, just going back and forth and throwing in that as a potential, the Union Park, but you know, we looked at some other areas and said, could this happen? Yeah, I guess it could. And tried to throw realistic numbers in there. Did we hit it? Who knows? And I'm sure that when Mr. Developer comes in and has an idea, throws it in front of us, it'll be different to some degree, but we're hoping that we have at least, you know, somewhere in the ballpark.
Ready. So we assumed 182 units there, so that would generate approximately 32,000 gallons of flow. That's peak flow.
And that's per
That's total for the whole 182 units.
per day, per hour, per.
That would be per day.
For super low conversion.
Yeah, exactly. That's for the wastewater infrastructure and for the water infrastructure, you're sizing things for those peaks, because it has to be able to meet that peak demand, so average flows will be considerably less than that. All right, so we talked through infrastructure requirements. This question probably, does this all going to cost? And I'll caveat this with the same thing that Chris mentioned earlier. These are conceptual level costs based on the assumptions that we made. So the three different projects, so the annex pump station and rerouting that force main. So that's rerouting the force main about 1,800 feet over the mountain road, as well as upgrading the infrastructure there to handle the additional pumping requirements. Basically, it's a higher discharge. This is going to go versus where it is now, which is more demand on the pumps, which requires bigger pumps essentially. Is the simplest way to put it. So that's estimated at $1.35 million for that project. The Crooker pump station, which is that 230 gallon per minute station there on the backside of the Crooker parcel, as well as the 3,300 foot force main to go over to the annex pump station. That's estimated $3.34 million. Then the biggest pump station, the I-295 pump station, that was the 400 gallon per minute station with a 5,000 linear foot force main, 800 linear feet going underneath I-295, so that would be directionally drilled. But the rest of this going through the Crooker parcel and down Main Street, that's estimated at $6.35 million. And I will note that last bullet there, gravity sewer costs are only included to basically get back to the main road from where the pump stations are. So the I-295 pump station is about a couple hundred feet off of Route 196. So we're assuming that section of gravity sewer is needed to put the pump station in. But without knowing what the developments are going to look like, it's basically impossible to size out and lay out the rest of the gravity sewer. So this is not an all-in cost if you were to put this pump station in, unless the development was literally very next to the station. So. And then we broke it down into two different categories. So you could do phased development. So this slide is going to touch on east of I-295 only. So basically installing that pump station, that 230 gallon minute station on the Crooker parcel, installing the force main in that short section of gravity sewer, and that's pumping up to the annex pump station. Redirection of the annex pump station force main is optional. You're only going to develop east of I-295 because you don't need to open up that flow for the west of 295. So you don't have to reroute that force main, it can stay where it is, whatnot. And then there's the small, on the wooded industrial zoned area where the mobile home park and that wooded area is in the northeastern side of the study area. A small private pump station would be required because of just the topography there. And whatnot. So that's east of I-295 only. No development west of I-295. On the flip side, west of I-295 only. So this is assuming there's no development done on the Crooker parcel. So this would require you to reroute that pump station force main for annex to open up that capacity along Main Street to accept that 400 gallons a minute from the proposed pump station just west of I-295. That's everything I have for slides. Are there any questions on this one before we hand it over to Chris?
Just the only thing I would add is on that, like the last slide, you know, it's possible that the west side could come in with a proposal and you know, put it on the table and into the town of some type of development on the west side and we look at that option there, doesn't, and it's just, and the same, the reverse is just the east side development on the Crooked parcel and the annex and Sandelman, it could be different too. Just options we're looking at.
I'm gonna go back to this slide just for a second. I want to make an important point here. While in this scenario, if you're just, development never happens west of I-295, it's all on the east side. We've noted here that theoretically you don't need to direct that force main from the annex up to Mountain Road. But it would be beneficial to do that, because it allows you to not just rely on all the flow in Topsham going down Main Street. There is a pipe that exists already in Mountain Road, a dry pipe that's not serving any users right now, so a pipe that was put in several years ago, that takes flow down towards Hedford Road and out that way. So that's certainly something that should be strongly considered, even if development west of I-295 does not. So that's a benefit of freeing up capacity. As you mentioned, Ryan, on Main Street, you get that out of there, and you don't develop west of 295, you get a lot of capacity coming down Main Street now to serve infill area in that existing sewer area on the other side of 196.
And that's what this report does. It gives us those insights of possibilities. We don't know what's gonna happen. And this just gives us some knowledge that we otherwise didn't have.
Chris, occasionally there's talk about fixing the section of TNN we don't own, so it could become a public road. Would we want to make sure that that dry pipe was replaced, or is that in good enough condition the road can be fixed with that?
There isn't a pipe. The sewer pipe starts right about here. The existing dry pipe goes from here. It's a 15-inch sewer that goes here. There is no sewer pipe. I mean, there is existing sewer that collects Parliament Circle area, takes it down across the ball field and connects out by the middle school. But there's no pipe in the road right now, either a pressure main or a gravity sewer on Can-Am. Is that the question that you're asking?
Yeah, so it would make sense before the road got fixed up for good to
Absolutely.
put the pressure right.
And it's Chris is gonna, water mains too.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, if you're gonna reconstruct that, obviously, new stormwater, sewer, water would be certainly advisable before you, do that to the road. Sure. Anything else on wastewater before we turn it over to Chris?
I'd like to add a little bit to the Can-Am.
Yes.
The sewer district has a right of way already with the Navy to put that pump station, turn it to, head it towards Mountain Road.
That's right.
So this has always been in the works. Just got to find somebody with a big pocket to do. But the idea is you got to keep in the back of your mind is Pinewood Drive. All of the sewer water goes to Pinewood Drive, then pumps to Brunswick. Nothing goes across this new bridge. Nothing goes across any of the railroad tracks for sewer. Sewer goes to Pinewood Drive, then go. And I'm gonna use a name that he won't mind. John Wazalowski, you need to remember this, when he came to town, he needed to sewer the Highlands. Okay, now, he paid in the town with a tip or whatever, help participated in there. But the Tenford Road was made for future growth, everything to come that way. And he did not bat an eye about putting that in. He paid for that 15-inch. I wish Stewie was here, but anyways, I'll do the best I can. But he paid for that. And he also wanted to pay for the laterals to go into everybody's home. And I will say to you, we said, no, you're opening up a can of worms. That you don't want to get involved with. You take care of the main and the road. And so, yes, developers do pay for a lot of this, and this is how it got done in town. But I won't take any more of your time on that, Chris, but that's important, that what John did. And we tried to get money from Cromwell when he did his you couldn't, it was like fucking a brick wall. But, you know, they just did it and took care of their own little project. But Conover was real big when they came to town. You should sit down with a six-pack and talk about how things are done the way they are in town and who did what. It's pretty fascinating. It's pretty good. But Wright and Pierce, don't mean to elaborate too much on them.
Mark,
They're a
did you-
class act.
Did you have a question?
So the additional work you just described.
We want to go back to
Yeah, well,
west side, east side, doesn't matter.
all of it. So
Yes.
you're collecting more and bringing more. So on the tail end of it, is there any limitations on the capacity of the processing and treatment side at the end? Is expansion costs, are those included in the?
We talked about that,
study?
we talked about that in the report. As Brody mentioned, there is, limited in one or two sections of pipe on Main Street, just to get it to Pinewood Drive. We looked at the most limiting section. That doesn't mean a section of pipe couldn't be replaced and increase capacity. That could be done. We looked at the Pinewood Drive pump station. There is, capacity there, to be able to handle the flow and capacity of the treatment plant. There would probably need to be some discussions with the agreement that's between the Topsham Sewer District and the Brunswick Sewer District on some of the flows that are in there. But it's not really per se a capacity limit, it's more just, stuff that's within the contract. And Chris, I don't know if you have.
Yeah,
more to add to that.
there's. If all of this developed out, we would have an issue with Brunswick, not because of Pinewood would probably take it. But once it got across, we would be hitting our max capacity allowance.
Just an allocation.
So, yeah, the allocation, we would have to go through and redo our.
They have to renegotiate the allocation that they have with the Brunswick Sewer District.
Yeah.
But that's just a contract term, it's something that could be negotiated. Yes, Kurt.
An earlier discussion around all this, we had a meeting at the sewer district, and I believe Rob Ponto said at the time it was between 900 and 1,000 homes of capacity until there was an issue. And I can't remember if that's contractual or physical constraints, but again, the number was roughly 900 to 1,000. And at the rate we're building houses, that gives us some pretty good elbow room. But
50 years.
yeah, but I just wanted to put that out there in terms of something we might be able to wrap our brains around, number of dwelling units.
Underwater.
It's very stress that discussion. So this is kicking off the water side of things. So when it comes to designing a public water system, we're mainly looking at two primary criteria, those being service pressures and our fire flow requirements, which are based on development. So stating that assumption now. So with service pressures, we're aiming for a range of around 35 to 80 PSI, with anything above 80 requiring additional infrastructure. And then on the fire flow side of things, under that bullet, we're summarizing what our assumptions are for these possible developments. So on the annex side, in the limited industrial zone, we would estimate around 2,000 gallons per minute for Crooker, and the mixed use zone a little bit higher with 35,000 gallons per minute. An additional criteria that we took into consideration for this study specifically was we consulted the water district very early on, assuming that they are going to be the folks who are going to take on this infrastructure. It's important that they were brought in and considered, and they wouldn't want to see any privately owned infrastructure going in with any of these developments. So to establish more baseline of what we're looking at on the east side, as that's where the only infrastructure on the water exists now. So with the annex in the limited industrial zone, we have fire flows of 1,000 gallons per minute. So that category is sufficient based on the criteria we kind of identified based on potential build out for that area. We're seeing adequate pressures of 35 to 55 PSI. These are all based on our hydraulic model that we developed with the water district. Moving towards the Crooker parcel, we do have adequate fire flows and pressures. I will say though, where we say there's 50 PSI of pressure on the Crooker parcel, that's at ground level. So once we start to build up multiple stories, we're gonna quickly lose that. So with a 10-foot increase in elevation, we lose around 5 feet of pressure. So that's gonna add up quickly.
Yes, and Rick, if your question would be, when we look at CPIC and our growth that we're possibly projecting and additional growth in the Topsham Fair Mall and Crooker, the existing conditions would not allow that to go more than 1 story or possibly 2.
Yeah, and we'll get into kind of the limitations of what each area would get based upon our evaluated approaches. But yeah, that's to identify that early now. Yeah, the type of build out that you kind of see now on the Topsham Fair Mall is what you're really going to get for most of those parcels or most of those areas that it's. And then obviously there's no water service on the west of down 196 on the other side of 295 until we get down to Ivanhoe. So this is a little bit more of a dense slide oh, perfect. Yeah, so we're under there, Chris. So we evaluated 3 main options when it came to development for the water side. So starting over here with this orange arrow, we consider our first approach to be to put up a tank on the east side that would allow service to the east side of 295, requiring some additional water improvements through Crooker and the annex. So that was our first approach. Our second approach we looked at is going to start over here with this blue arrow with the laser you can see here. This approach would include a tank and it would provide service to both the east and the west side, going under or going across the interstate, excuse me, and it would also loop down 196 towards the White House Crossing Ivanhoe intersection, as that would be required by the district if we were to get onto that side. And then finally, our third approach here that we looked at would be to consider both of those and put 2 smaller tanks on, one on the east, one on the west, and allow for some longer range of development. So this slide here is just summarizing kind of the advantages and disadvantages of the 3 approaches that we talked about. Now you see here there's 4. So let's kind of go back to our baseline here, our existing conditions and what we could do with the current infrastructure that's there on the east side. So currently, as we highlighted before, there's very low fire protection for both the annex and the Highland Greens. So there wouldn't be any improvements that could be made to benefit that. Additionally, there's no flexibility in the annex either. You couldn't, as we mentioned, can't do any multi-story development. So what you're currently seeing there in that area is the best we might get with the existing system. And I'll mention here, this picture is showing the Village Drive booster station. So this booster station is what exists now, and it's boosting water service to the Highland Greens. This was built to water district standards back in 2008. The additional private infrastructure that exists is the Highland Green system as well as the annex. So with that baseline, those are some items that could be leveraged for to expand on the annex and Crooker. And I should mention that we could also expand water mains through the Crooker, looping a water main there to allow for build out there. But again, similar to Topsham Fair Mall, what you see there is the best.
Yeah, I just want to make sure everyone clearly understands. The Highland Green, which is actually outside of the study area, but it's kind of important because of that existing booster station and how it was built, and it could be part of a future redevelopment of the water system on this side. But there are 2 private water systems in play out there. The Highland Green water system, which serves that station right there, pulls off the public system and serves fire flows and pressure needs for all of the Highland Green development. There's also a private, formerly, I guess, owned by Mira at this time, booster station near the schools that serves that small area, basically the annex area. The schools are served by the water district system, but there's a private system there, so you have two systems in play right now out there. And I guess just important for people to realize what is out there right now for infrastructure. And there have been discussions about tanks in the past to help serve this area. But at the time, it was decided that the approach that was taken, staying with the private system, was the least investment in what was gonna to serve those areas for the time being.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. And then similar as Brody and Chris mentioned on the wastewater side, there is a dry water main in the as well. So that's another piece of infrastructure coming on that side as well. Moving with these development approaches, kind of with the investments of tanks. So if a single east side tank, a $500,000 east side tank were put in place, you would be able to expand and develop more on the east side. You would have limited development allowed for the annex. So you could replace that your infrastructure we were just talking about and improve the fire flows there, as well as additionally outside of scope, the Highland Greens. And then you could also get multi-story development for both the annex and the Kroger parcel. But since no water service would be expanded onto the west side, no development on the mixed-use parcel would come out of that approach. And the next two, the west side tank approach, if a larger tank were to be put on the west side, you would be able to meet all of our design criteria. So you would have those adequate pressures and the adequate fire flows for both the east side and the west side. So your development potentials are a lot less limited with that investment. And then same for that multi-phase expansion approach. So that would be a smaller tank on both the east and the west, kind of breaking up that investment.
All you're doing here is just throwing just different scenarios out, whether if you did one on the east side or one on the west side, or one big one on the west side, or two little ones on each side.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think the example would be particularly for that multi-phase expansion. Let's say that you weren't sure whether the west side was going to develop or not, or there wasn't a developer that was coming forward, but you had some immediate needs on the east side and you wanted to get something done over here. You build the east side tank, and then 5 or 10 years later, something's happening on the west side. We can build a smaller tank over there. If you knew right now, had a crystal ball and said, we know both sides are going to develop, we know what's going to happen, you're going to see the next slide that building the tank on the west side
Saves money.
saves money.
Yeah.
Because it's, you're looking at, if you do 2 tanks, it's just 2 tanks and more site work and stuff. So, sorry, I stole your thunder. But it's hard for us to know, or hard for any of us to know.
It's hard for anybody.
What could happen. So that's why we broke it down into an east that just could serve the east side, a west that could serve both sides, or a phased approach that you could build separately. Yeah. So.
And what this does, it helps this economic committee answer questions that are coming at us now, and we have no answers. So this at least tells Mr. Developer, this is what it's gonna cost.
Yeah, and to reiterate what Chris just said too, with any development on the west, if that were to be desired, you would need the tank on the west, is kind of what that last slide was showing. So
yeah.
So again, reiterating a lot of this, these are high level planning cost estimates with contingency baked into them. As you see with these 4 approaches that we evaluated, they're all kind of drove by the cost of the tanks. So that's the main factor there. That's the cost of the tank, the site work, and the transmission mains that go to those tanks. So as you see with an existing tank and zone situation, that investment with minimal water main improvements and leveraging the infrastructure that exists now would get you a cost of $8,655,000. With a single east tank, you would be looking at $1.2 million. Again, with adding on those water mains and some system improvements. With the west side tank, that number goes up to $18 million. Why that tank's gonna be a little bit larger, you also have that additional looping that we requiring by the water district down than the White House crossing.
But the single west tank would cover both sides.
So yes, exactly. To highlight that, single west tank would cover both sides of that. So with that, that increase there, you are getting additional service. So, and then same with the dual tank approach, you get service on both sides, but at the cost of $25 million. And that goes up about 2 tanks. That's the factor. So I guess what we're talking about tanks, these are 2 examples of, and this is my last slide for the water side of it. These are 2 examples of what a tank might look like. So this isn't typically common around here. You don't see these very often, but what you're looking at are 2 elevated types of tanks. On the left, there's all the steel, on the right, composite concrete base. What that's doing is it's elevating our volume of water to the necessary grade line so we can gravity feed down from there to get this fire plus that we desire. So yeah, so
And just on that, if you've ever been to the water tank that you know where it is in town here on the top of Oak Street, it doesn't look anything like this. And that's because it's not, it's maybe 50 feet tall. For the existing hydraulic grade line and the pressure zone that's in Topsham, you don't need to elevate it higher. But if you had to get as high as we need to get to serve these areas, to build something that big of a diameter, that high would be extremely expensive. So you go with something that has the water volume up top and just the area, smaller area on that left one is just where the pipes exist to feed it and supply and feed that. So something if anyone's been out in the past, we've got a lot of flat terrain, you see tanks like this a lot.
And to give context to that height there, it would be around 120, 130 feet tall, kind of to the left side.
For the single tank.
The person, yeah.
I have a question, going back to Highland Green. Highland Green currently has about 230, 240 homes, but that could triple the number, at least, is that factored in here?
Not quite, this wasn't out of our scope, or out of our study area, so we didn't factor in the development of the Highland Green. Research.
I didn't know whether John was Lusky had built. How much he had built in, how many beyond, but I lived there,
Yeah.
So I've been told that the number of houses could triple from the 230, 240 to where they're at.
I think
That's
that's
significant.
Go in all the
doubling of
the fairways.
Or maybe triple.
that much.
Yeah.
I think on the sewer side, there's plenty of capacity to be able to get that flow. We're talking wastewater and water. And I'm not sure that the booster station you saw earlier, if that's big enough for all of that. But certainly that would want to be factored into the size. It's probably more sizes of the water mains that would be required. Questions on the water side? I got one final very wordy slide.
Over here.
Yeah, two questions for you. Sure. Similar to the sewer, so that's the pressure and the flow, input on the makeup side and the consumption side with the well fields, the treatment of what's going in. Is there any?
I don't think there's any concerns. I don't know if we talked, if the water district expressed any concerns about their capacity.
Yeah, during the discussions with them, there wasn't any issue with
The other question is the dual tank. Is there any benefit to a dual tank as far as a redundancy and or an outage issue with the tank, or would the existing tank provide that redundancy?
I mean, I think someone's gonna always say we have 2 tanks, it would be preferable over a single tank.
That was that existing tank considered in the things of what?
That existing tank would not be adequate to meet the service needs for the hill across here. So that's why we're elevating it to a high pressure zone, a higher pressure zone to serve those areas.
Thanks, Chris.
This is covered in our report. It's something, Andy, I know you wanted us to cover. Again, very wordy, but there's a lot of things to cover here. There's a question about potential funding options for projects like this. And there's so much more that I can say that's in these words that's on the slide, but I'll try to cover some of them for you, starting in the top left. Maine Municipal Bond Bank, communities in Maine can borrow money. I don't know, Mark, do we have any loans through the bond bank in Topsham here, or have we had any?
Yeah, less than $500,000 in bonds for it.
So that's a good thing. That's a non-competitive funding. That's funding that any community can take out as long as you have good financial standing. A little higher interest rates than some of the other ones, and some of the other ones are grants. But it's got the least amount of restrictions and requirements on it. Interest rate, we just had a client close on a loan, it was 4.67%. I'm not sure if that was a 20 or 30-year loan. And again, these are generic funding options. I'm not saying that this is something the town of Topsham is going to fund. I'm just talking about funding options that could be available to the town, or potentially, developers would have different funding options available to them. These are mostly stuff that's available to a municipality. The next two are the Clean Water SRF, CW SRF, Clean Water SRF, and the Drinking Water SRF, State Revolving Loan Funds. That's money that comes out of Maine DEP. It's federal money, but it comes through Maine DEP and the Maine Drinking Water Program, which is part of the Department of Health and Human Services. Those have much lower interest rates. Sometimes they can have principal forgiveness or grants associated with them. They do have a number of requirements associated with them, environmental reviews, you have to use federal wage rates for construction projects, Build America, Buy America requirements, which add cost to projects. And the one thing I'll say about those is when they rate projects, and they are competitive, they look at, let's say, treatment facilities or water systems that have issues that could cause health concerns and stuff like that. Things like extending a sewer to serve economic growth wouldn't necessarily score very highly. And those programs don't have nearly enough money to fund all of the need in Maine right now for wastewater and water projects. But they are a potential funding option. The Maine DEC, Department of Economic and Community Development, has this community development block grants, CDBG grants. Those are up to $1 million. The one caveat with those is you do have to have greater than 50% low to moderate income in your service area. That might be, I don't know where the town stands, that might be challenging. And you do have to do an income survey to be able to show that. And the limit again is $1 million. Economic Development, USEDA, Economic Development Administration, they provide grant funding for projects. They usually, in a community, let's say as an example, I'll use Jay as an example, that had the IP, the mill shut down. A community that's struggling economically and is looking to do some projects that could help their economy. Those are real popular projects with EDA. I'm not sure, the EDA would look at this project that way, but nevertheless, these are funds we deal with a lot. Perhaps the one that might be the most promising for the town, if the town were looking to invest funds in any of this work, would be congressionally directed spending. That's money that's coming out of your U.S. senators and U.S. representatives here in the state of Maine. Shelley Pingree is our representative, and Senators King and Collins on the senator side. That's all grant funding. There aren't any income requirements. I've had communities that are very well-to-do communities get funds, upwards to several $1 million from this. You do have to comply with all the federal requirements, similar to some of the other ones. But that's an opportunity that a town, if you can get, show the importance of this project to one of the senators or representatives and they really like it, they can push that forward. I will say that happened last year. It has to get through the Appropriations Committee, which we have Senator Collins, who is the vice chair of that committee. So a lot of broad money has come into Maine, but it never made it into this year's budget for this year. It did not make it through the budget process, so none of those monies got distributed, so there is risk. The last one is called the WIFIA program, and that's through US EPA. It's basically a federally run bank that supports major projects. And when you're talking about major projects in major communities that need a lot of funding at a relatively low interest rate, this is the program. For a community the size of Topsham, you'd have a $5 million minimum project, and you can obviously see from the numbers that some of them are fairly significant. They do have federal wage rate requirements and whatnot, and they do have some upfront costs. But that's an option as well, and I think that's something that the town would qualify. But that's all borrowed money. That's not no grant money associated with that. And that's not competitive either. I think that money is available through a significant application process. So that's a lot. There's a lot of information there. There are some funds that are available. I think some of the ones on this list would be a challenge for, just based on my experience working with a lot of communities, to maybe qualify for.
How much do you think the federal wage rate requirements add add to the budget percentage wise?
That's a lot, it depends a lot on, the communities that you're working in. In some communities, it may not make much of an impact in an urban area, because there are, you know, the workers that are working there are already getting paid high enough to meet federal wage rates requirements. Sometimes in less developed, counties in the state, you see a bigger impact where the local workers may not be getting paid as much as the federal wage rate, because I think that's pretty consistent. And so I can't really give you a percentage on how much that adds. But a lot of contractors are very used to dealing with it. And sometimes they have to pay their people higher than they would get on a non-federal wage rate job.
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to add,
On the funding that a lot of the select will know what TDI is thinking, is we asked when we received the proposal from, company to just look at what's out there for funds, not just town, but for developers, private development. So when someone does come to the town, you know, we might have a litany of options that they can look at and help them reach out and on their own and look at funding options. So, really, I mean, this is great. Don't even know if the town's interested. But we need to look at what all our options are. So we've got a proposal, I think it's under $5,000.
Yeah.
To just go out there and look, not make any applications or anything for funds, but just look and see what's available. Obviously, we'll check with Chris on these, but I'm pretty sure that this person is aware of these too. So that's a step we're thinking of doing, and we'll probably take that at our next board meeting.
yeah,
Wanted to make a couple of comments and put the report in context. Why did we do this? Why did TDI commission this? And I want to thank Mike Pierce for the hard work. I want to thank the water and sewer districts for contributing to the study. They saw value in it and each contributed $5,000. Over time, you know, I have worked with my development companies, I've worked with developer over years, 20 years. I've heard many discussions about what would it take to break into the west side of 295. And that conversation almost became, you know, like a rote. We get to a point and say, well, how much does that cost? And then we would kind of look around, I don't know, it's still lunch. So it was just, the data was 20 years old and it really just didn't answer any questions. So we brought Mike Pierce on board, we expanded the service area and really focusing on the areas where growth is, I guess, where we'd like to see it. Brooker, the west side of the highway, near everything. And boy, were we surprised when they came back with the cost estimates, and I'm glad you were all sitting down for that. And this is really kind of building off the report that Camoin did. If you didn't remember that or you saw that, where they projected how much housing and office space and we could conceivably add in Topsham. And then the question was, well, where would that go? And we looked around and there's not a whole lot of empty lots, especially within the service area. So what would we need to do to expand the service area? Well, kind of now we know. And this is a even bigger of trying TDI's effort to help the leadership with economic development priorities, strategic priorities. And like Andy said, you guys may be like, yeah, this ain't happening. But to the extent that the town recognizes growth may be inevitable, but we don't have $25 million in our back pockets anytime soon. I'm going to work with folks to break down smaller projects that could be looked at. One of the first things that would probably need to happen would be to redirect that sewer force main up over the hill to Mountain Road. But what does that take? Is that a couple $1 million? And I throw that around. I've got it, but is that a bite that the town could take, maybe through some of these funding mechanisms, maybe through self-generated revenues that could help sort of break in the future of that. So I just wanted to say that this report is thoughtful on looking at growth at a point where
we're hard pressed for housing. The whole world's changing. Are we ever gonna develop anything else like a big box store? I don't know, but we definitely will need housing. And CPIC folks have been working hard on really good, vision for Topsham, for the Crooker quadrant, and that'll include something more than 2 stories tall. So even if we do nothing on the west side, how do we make that developable to its potential? So I think we're gonna be coming back as TDI, we may be coming back with proposals to have Wright Pierce bring the study level down a little bit more and looking at opportunities for paving the way for all of this to come to fruition in the future. So that's why we did it. I hope you're finding it useful. I know it's a lot to take in, and again, I would expect that we would be back with further discussions. So thanks.
Yeah, I guess, with that, are there any questions of the consultants or us?
I have a question. I heard you say that you, Mr. Chairman, that you wanted to, request $5,000 to do further studies about what income sources are available for loans and grants. But I also heard, Chris say that, that the sources are different for contractors versus the town. What was your plan with this $5,000?
Well, we'll still look at all funding.
Both sides.
And to keep it at that level, I mean, again, a lot of people want to just start applying for money and see what Mark can come up with, or there's a magic wand, and let's go. But I think we need to identify the options that we have.
So is the benefit to encourage contractors to come in, developers to come in to build things by saying, listen, we're heard about these things. What's to stop them from?
I think this is just a guess. I can see a developer coming in and saying, wow, all these improvements need to be made. When are you gonna make those? And that's not gonna be the answer. It has to be a combination of, hopefully some grants that we can get, to improve that infrastructure, but also how much does that developer need to put in his budget, to do this? Say that development on the west side, there's a motel and a big housing development there, and he wants, he's pricing it out, he wants to know what it's gonna cost. At least we've got those rough numbers now. And again, what Kurt was saying, we can get some of the foundation of this going to help either the annex area or the multi-use area. Who knows? It's just, I think that small amount of money, and I think the money that TDI has should be used in this manner to just be more knowledgeable and how we can move forward, because again, it is a great opportunity for Topsham.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, thank you very much.
Very informative, thank you. Well done.
Our select board members online, do you have anything you'd like to ask? Questions, comments?
So just going back to that potential funding list that was given, really we're just talking about 3 sources that are even feasible right now. And that would be the bond, the DEP, CWSRF, and the Maine DWSRF, because none of the other ones, they're slated for elimination or they just don't have funding. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I can comment on that. The bond bank, I think the town of Topsham could borrow money to move forward any of these projects with the Maine Municipal Bond Bank. Congressionally directed spending money that comes out of the senators, you need to get letters of support and send those off to the senators, talk to the senators or the representatives. They just closed their application process for this year, so you have to wait until next year. Again, there's no guarantee that that's gonna pass and get into the federal budget like it didn't do this year, but it had the previous 2 or 3 years. Obviously, we had to change of administration in Washington this year, so things changed. That's a real potential funding source for you. I think you could borrow money from WIFIA if you wanted. I think their interest rates are the current treasury rate, which is pretty much right around the bond bank rate. So again, that's borrowed money. The money for the Clean Water and Drinking Water SRF program, you can apply for those funds for these projects. I just don't know how competitive they would be. I would think, if I could speculate on the water side, because you have 2 existing private systems that currently have some limitations on fire flows and whatnot on service pressures, that might be appealing to the drinking water program. So there may be a potential there to get some funds. That application would need to come from the water district though. It can't come from the town. It needs to come from the Topsham Water District, so they could potentially be a partner with you. So there's more options than just a couple. And then, Andy, sounds like you're gonna explore, potentially if the
Private.
select board wishes additional options. And I didn't get into any tips or any stuff like that. This was just on stuff that we deal with for municipal, public infrastructure projects.
That would be speculation at this point. You just really can't even.
And I will say, getting funding for projects of this magnitude takes time. So it's important that if any of these things are important to the town, to the residents, to what have you, that you start moving forward quickly. And I also say this all the time. We did this 21 years ago, and I was floored by how much more expensive it is to do it now than it was then. There's never going to be a cheaper time to do it than yesterday. It's just, costs are going up. We've had a lot of cost increases on stuff, post-COVID and whatnot. Costs have skyrocketed for a lot of projects and a lot of things you buy every day. So it's worth at least investigating funding options to see how that might help move something forward.
Thank you.
Any other questions from people online? Okay, any other questions, anyone in the room? If not, then thank you everyone for coming tonight, and this is good information, so we start some discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, folks. Thank you.